Last week I visited CAROWINDS in Charlotte, North Carolina, and this park had an impressive coaster count of 13. Of course, I got to ride every coaster the park had to offer, so now I'm going to rank them from my least to most favorite. But before we get into the top 10, here are 3 coasters that just didn't make the cut. Number 13 is Vortex, and this is by far the worst B&M coaster I've ever ridden. I understand it was one of the first rides they ever manufactured, but man, this is a rough start. Not only is the layout bland, but the headbanging comes at you at full force, and on a stand-up coaster like this, it couldn't be more uncomfortable. I'd say just ride this for the credit and never set foot on it again. Number 12 is the Flying Ace Aerial Chase. So this ride is supposed to be for the families, and yet there is so much headbanging on it that I wouldn't even recommend it for adults. Perhaps if they could get lap bars on this coaster, then it would be a lot more tolerable, but for right now, it's not that good. Number 11 is Lucy's Krabby Cabby, my 75th credit. I'm dead serious, by the way. For a kids coaster, this ride has a pretty impressive layout. It even has a little bit of airtime towards the end. Well, it's not really airtime, but for kids, it certainly would be. Overall, I'd say this is an excellent segue to get kids interested in the park's bigger attractions. And unlike Vortex and the Flying Ace Aerial Chase, it doesn't have any headbanging, so that's always a plus. And now we've come to the top 10. Number 10 is the Carolina Cyclone, and this is just your average run-of-the-mill aero looper. It's got a double loop and a double corkscrew, but it really doesn't have much else to offer. The ride is also pretty rough and unfortunately not that enjoyable of an experience, but on the bright side, it is really nice to look at from the path. So at least it's pretty good on an aesthetic point of view. Number 9 is Ricochet. This is a typical Wild Mouse coaster, so there really isn't much to say about it. It's made by Mack Rides, but unfortunately it doesn't have the Dark Knight coaster's restraints. Instead, it has a metal T-bar to separate the riders, much like the Gotham City Gauntlet. So like other Wild Mouse rides, your thighs are going to be pressed pretty hard against it. It isn't really a comfortable ride, and as usual, I found the dips to be much better than the switchbacks. To be honest, I prefer the Gotham City Gauntlet to this, at least that had a lot more theming. The number 8 spot is going to Woodstock Express. This is the perfect wooden coaster for families with small children. It's not that intense, but it's also a very fun ride that has a classic wooden coaster feel to it. It also really helps that the track is well maintained and doesn't shake you around like other wooden coasters out there. It's a small, breezy little ride, and there's really no shame in checking it out. Coming in at number 7 is Nighthawk. Now call me crazy, but I didn't think this coaster was that bad. It is flawed and certainly bumpy, but I didn't find it to be nearly as painful as I've heard some people say it is. Of course, it did help that I rode it in the front row, so I'm not sure how other rows compare to it. One big positive this coaster has is its appearance. This is perhaps the best looking relocated coaster out there. The way it goes over the water makes it almost impossible to tell that it was once at California's Great America. Plus, the yellow track with the blue supports really fits the ride's setting. Unfortunately, it isn't exactly a comfortable ride. Unlike a B&M Flyer, it feels like you spend more time laying on your back than laying face down towards the ground. It's also harder to see in front of you, so it really takes away from the flying experience. Nevertheless, I'd say this ride is just fine. It isn't that rough, and the inversions are pretty fun, but overall it doesn't compare to something like Manta or Superman Ultimate Flight. Number 6 is a coaster that really surprised me in a good way, the Carolina Goldrusher. While this wasn't the smoothest or most exciting coaster out there, I was honestly surprised by how fun it was. This coaster feels like a much better mine train than Great Adventure's Runaway Mine Train. It goes underground, past wooden beams, and even into a surprisingly intense tunnel. That last element really did take me by surprise. Plus, it has 2 lift hills, making it a pretty long ride. The helixes were enjoyable, the ride was pretty scenic, and it was just a fun experience, plain and simple. For the oldest roller coaster still operating at the park, it holds up pretty well nowadays. Flying Cobras, the park's Vekoma boomerang that was once known as Headspin at Geauga Lake. This is my favorite Vekoma boomerang by a long shot. Not only does it have the new restraints which make it impossible to have any headbanging, but for some reason it feels a lot more intense than other boomerangs out there. You pull some really good G's on the Cobra roll and the vertical loop, and the drops are really forceful as well. And with the excellent new paint job it got this year, it has never looked better, especially in the park's county fair section. Even if you're not a big boomerang fan, I'd suggest giving this one a shot. Coming in at number 4 is the Hurler. I was just looking at this coaster thinking it was not going to be fun at all. I'm not a big fan of those standard PTC trains and went in with very low expectations. However, this was not a bad ride at all. Now I did ride it in the front, so the airtime was pretty lacking, but it was a nice wooden coaster experience and it was thankfully painless. The seats on this ride are like couch cushions and pretty much soften the blow of any roughness the ride can throw at you. It's far from the best wooden coaster I've ridden, but it's not a bad ride. And considering it's the only major wooden coaster there, I'd say it's a pretty good fit. Now we get into the top 3, and these coasters alone are more than worth the trip. Number 3 is Afterburn, which as of right now is my second favorite B&M invert I've ever ridden. The first, of course, being Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa. The ride feels so fast and so forceful that I was honestly shocked at how terrifying it was. It was without a doubt the most forceful B&M invert I've ever ridden. The only downside I could find with this coaster is that the final corkscrew caused a bit of headbanging. But on such a good ride like this, what's the use in nitpicking? You just zoom through all those inversions at high speeds and the ride still feels like the perfect length. It doesn't feel too short and it's really exciting. It's definitely one of those coasters you must check out when you go to CAROWINDS. Number 2 is Intimidator, and when I first rode this coaster in the back row, I did enjoy it, but I admit I was a bit underwhelmed. I thought the trim brakes really made the ride's momentum inconsistent. I know that a lot of people call this Intimidator, and most likely it's because they rode it in the back row. However, when I rode it in the front row, I was simply blown away. You don't feel the trims nearly as much as in the back, and this makes the airtime a lot more exciting. It is a nice, long ride, and those hills are enormous. A front row ride on this is by far my favorite hypercoaster experience, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And now for the grand champion of the park's coaster lineup, Fury 325 at number 1. This is not only my favorite coaster at the park, but by far the best roller coaster I've ever ridden, period. This ride shows no mercy, from the seemingly endless first drop, to the unrelenting speed, to the forceful flojector airtime, to even the impressive lateral Gs. This ride is stunning in every sense of the word. A front row night ride on this is simply unbeatable, and you won't see anything else like it out there. Even if it was the only major coaster at the park, I'd make the trip out to CAROWINDS just for this. It really is that amazing. I really do hope we get to see more B&M Gigas. These things are just massive. Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to subscribe and follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You could find links in the description. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.